the government is the problem. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time. I urge my colleagues to support this rule and move the previous question on the resolution.
Question is on moving the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Question, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Speaker, on that I request the yeas and the nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring the vote by yeas and nays will rise and remain standing. Sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20. The chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption of the resolution.
The first roll call votes of the day on this last day before the summer recess. 2 votes in this series, beginning with a procedural motion, followed by the rule for debating the drought aid measure. After general speeches this morning, members turned to debate on a resolution recommending reprimand for California Congresswoman Laura Richardson for violation of federal law and House rules, including compelling office staff to work on her 2010 political campaign. A House ethics panel released a report yesterday detailing the infractions and calling for a $10,000 fine. You can read a statement from the committee. It's on our website at cspan.org. Coming up, we are expecting debate on drought aid legislation. A few minutes ago, I spoke with a reporter covering the bill on Capitol Hill. Ben Terrace writes for National Journal, why are House Republican leaders pursuing this standalone drought aid bill rather than a bill tied to a short-term extension of farm programs?
Well, this is actually kind of their third option. Originally, the goal was to have a farm bill that would be 5 years. The 2008 Farm Bill expires at the end of this year. Then they couldn't have the votes for that. There was too much division within the Republican Party, and also Democrats weren't psyched about the cuts to food stamps. So the next plan was to have a 1-year extension of the 2008 Farm Bill, have drought aid attached to that, but even that couldn't get the votes. So now this is, like I said, their third option. It's their go small and then go home option, just to have drought aid, because the drought is such a big deal right now that they can't do nothing. So they have to do at least something, and this is their attempt to do that.
Well, how much will this drought aid bill cost, and how will it be funded?
It's about $383 million for the drought aid, but it's going to be offset with cuts to conservation programs. And so I think the net savings is about $250 million after the cuts to conservation.
And who qualifies for it, and how would it be used?
The biggest concern right now is livestock. Crop insurance covers a lot of agriculture around the country, but livestock doesn't have anything quite like crop insurance. And with prices of their feed going up and with their animals dying in the heat, they need to get some money, and mostly livestock, but also some tree farmers, some fruit farmers will qualify as well.
Originally, this was to be a suspension bill, which needs a 2/3 threshold, but that plan was changed to require a simple majority. Why is that? What was the problem with reaching the higher threshold?
Sure. Well, originally they thought they were going to get Democratic support just so they could go home. But it looked like Democrats weren't really going to come on board. The cuts to conservation, they weren't too psyched about. They also didn't really like the idea of supporting the Republicans when they have their own plans of what the bill should look like. So without any Democratic support, or with few Democrats coming on board, it was going to be tough to get the votes. They also were going to lose some of their own conservatives as well.
What's the outlook for the Farm Bill now that drought aid is moving separately?
That's a good question. It's hard to know, really. Once this package passes, which it probably will, they'll go home. They'll have all of August, and Democrats like Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow thinks that will be a good time to continue negotiations and come back in September. And you know, the Farm Bill expires on September 30th. I mean, there will be some leeway after that, but they really want to get something done before then.
What's likely to happen to this House drought aid legislation in the Senate?
Well, it's not likely to go anywhere in the Senate anytime soon. They don't really like it. Harry Reid said that if they had a drought package that looked exactly like the package that they had in their own Senate bill, they could support it, but this is different enough. So probably it'll pass here, and then they'll keep conversations going into the summer.
Ben Terrace is with National Journal. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And an hour of general debate on the drought aid bill is expected following this vote. Also coming up in the House today, more work on tax legislation. Again, the House voting on a procedural motion right now, and then the rule for the drought aid bill. Again, followed by general debate on drought aid. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi right now holding her weekly legislative briefing. This began just a short time ago.
I think others have discredited that study that they put forth. But the fact is, it's self-evident. It didn't work before. It didn't work before. President Bush has one of the worst records of job creation of any president, and again, with such a ditch that he took us in, that it would continue later because it was exacerbated by the financial crisis, that lack of supervision and attention caused in his administration as well. So it took us to a near depression. We don't want to go there again. And again, I know that the handmaidens of the millionaires think that that's the only way. Trickle down. Well, I don't know what's trickling down, but it's not a pleasant experience for the middle class. Instead, money is extracted up to them. But I think that we're going to have to go. Maybe one more question?
You said that the reform of the tax code, that all of this should be nonpartisan,
Yes.
bipartisan. But both sides, over the years as this has been debated, really started a position where they think the other their entire viewpoint is completely wrong. The trickle down on the Republican side, any sort of tax cut or any sort of tax increase being unacceptable. How do you take the politics out of it?
Well, I think it has been done. Again, experience shows us that it has been done. President Bush, President George Herbert Walker Bush, during his campaign, he said, "Read my lips, no new taxes." That was his view of the economic situation at the time, that would be okay. When he became president and saw what the how things had perhaps changed, let's say it that way, and you can read his own book and see what he said about agreeing at Andrews Air Force Base to a compromise. So we all come in, I mean, I don't believe in trickle down. They don't believe in percolate up. So, okay, now let's sit down at the table and figure this out. It doesn't mean we exchange our philosophy. It means we recognize that we have to compromise, and that recognizing the legitimate role of the public sector in job creation and recognizing the very important role of the private sector in job creation. We have to promote growth. We have to address the deficit, and we can do so in a bipartisan way, as was done at Andrews Air Force Base with President Bush as president, as was done before, addressing some issues that related to Medicare and Social Security, with President Reagan and Speaker O'Neill. So we have experiences that show this. We also have an experience in the Clinton administration. When we passed on the floor in 1993 our economic package, which required an increase in taxes at the higher end. It was very unpopular because nobody wants tax increases, but it was very necessary to address the budget. What resulted in that was, working with the private sector, over 20 million jobs were created. What also happened there was, in at least the last 4 Clinton budgets, there was no deficit. They were either in surplus or just even. They took us on a trajectory of $5.6 trillion on the way to surplus. President Bush came in, tax cuts for the high-end, prescription drug giveaway to the pharmaceutical industry, 2 unpaid-for wars, but almost immediately, even without the full extent of the wars, almost immediately with the tax cuts and the prescription drug bill, don't take it from me, that's what the Congressional Budget Office told us during the Bush years, that took us on a trajectory of $5.6 trillion the other way, a swing of $11 trillion, unheard of in our country's history. And now they want us to go down that path again. It did not work then. There's so much more that's wrong with what's on the floor right now. But the clearest picture of what it does to the middle class and what it does to millionaires is it's stunning. It almost has an immorality to it. It certainly is the reflection of who sent them to Congress. Thank you all very much. Have a good August district work period. Perhaps if we stay in, as is your wish, we'll see you again before this is over. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
From the dean.
A portion of House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi's weekly legislative briefing. We missed a little of it. While this vote is underway, we'll go back now and show it to you from the beginning.
Good morning. So here we are this day before we leave for the August district work period. I think I see a sign of enthusiasm for that departure in this room. No, you want to stay. Good. We want to stay too, because there's so much unfinished business. I have to, though, focus on what is at hand on the floor today, just before I sit on the floor. During the Bush years, when President Bush was president, we saw tax policies that enabled the greatest extraction of wealth from the middle class up to the high end. Sucking up money from the middle class to the high end. Greatest policies in that regard. Until now. Until now. Yesterday you saw on the floor a proposal that for 1 year would give a tax cut of $160,000 to people making over $1 million a year. That would be on average. And at the same time, that same bill for 1 year would, on average, increase taxes on the middle class by around $1,000. $160,000 tax cut for the high end, $1,000 tax increase for the middle class. That was yesterday. Today, they're doubling down. By putting out their principles for tax policy, they are now doubling down. In their proposal, millionaires will pay less. $331,000 tax break for people making over $1 million at the cost to the middle class of paying more of $4,500. How many people in our country do you think are aware of this blueprint for, again, extracting money from the middle class and giving it to the wealthy in our country? You have to give the Republicans credit. They're very clear about their agenda. When they talk about tax cuts for the rich, they talk about rewarding success. What they don't talk about is the tax increase for the middle class, which is devastating to our country. The middle class is the backbone of our democracy. Tax cuts for the middle class are spent. They inject demand into the economy. They create jobs. Assuming the expiration of the Bush tax cuts, not even to mention these that they're plotting, assuming the expiration of the Bush tax cuts reduces the deficit, injects more certainty into the economy, and certainly into the lives of America's great middle class. So this is a very, very important day, because to their credit, the Republicans are going out there and telling the American people, hoping they're not listening, what they intend to do. In Washington, D.C., the subject of tax policy is the be-all, end-all of the special interest. They see their fulfillment in tax breaks. It's really quite sad when you see that they would rather give $38 billion in tax breaks to big oil and cut that much money from Pell Grants. They're very open about those kinds of different priorities. But this focus right now is on their principles of how you go forward. $330,000 for people making over $1 million, and that happens every year. Every year. The Romney tax plan is not that much different. They all reflect the Ryan budget, which says tax breaks for the wealthiest, make the middle class pay more, seniors pay more for Medicare as we break the Medicare guarantee, students pay more as we give tax breaks to the high end. So if you ever want to know what is the central focus of the special interest in Washington, D.C., you need only look at the proposals of the Republican Party for the high end and special interest. Any questions? Let's try tonight. You had the last one, I think, last night, didn't you?
I had the second one. You mentioned that they've been very clear, the Republicans have been very clear about what they want to do with tax policy.
Yeah.
Isn't the converse of that, though, that Democrats have not laid out any specifics about where you guys would go to flatten the code or to make it more broader based? I mean, I guess...
Well, no, I completely disagree with you, respectfully. The fact is, we've been very clear. President Obama has said it in his campaign and since then, and in this campaign as well. The Democrats want to have fairness in our tax code, that we want to go forward with giving, having the tax cuts for those making over $250,000, a couple making over $250,000, to have those tax cuts expire. What that is a tax cut for 100% of the American people. It's just that over $250,000, you don't get the pie sweetened for you. And with that, to say, when we go down that path and inject some more certainty into our economy and our fiscal soundness, we then go to the table, put everything on the table, and talk about tax fairness, tax simplification. You cannot do it dribs and drabs. You have to do it comprehensively.
But what major tax expenditures would you want to look at as part of that?
Well, I think we've been really clear about that in terms of, I mentioned one of them, tax breaks for big oil, for example. But the fact is, it's not just a question of asking about one or the other. It's working in a bipartisan way to have fairness in our code that meets the needs of fiscal soundness, of promoting growth, and strengthening the middle class in our country. That is a debate that we've all been pleading for a long time. And it is not with a set of principles that says, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to give a $330,000 tax break to the wealthy. Now let's talk fairness. I think if you're talking about being open to the proposals, and within our own caucus we have many suggestions. But this has to be bipartisan. It has to be nonpartisan, really. And it has to be fair, and it has to be simplified. And we have to do it. But we don't start off with a basis of this kind of unfairness.
Madam Mayor. So on the issue of dribs and drabs versus a grand, the grand tax code, are you open to a one-year fix of the sequester, or does that have to be solved in this broader context that you're talking about? And as a corollary to that, are you encouraged at all by a group of Republican senators going around the country calling for revenue, not necessarily in the form of higher taxes, but revenue in order to patch the sequester?
I'm not aware of what they're doing. I'm not aware of what this group of senators are doing, and I don't know what the one-year fix is. You'd have to see what it is. But we don't even have to get, they're talking about avoiding the cliff. We don't even have to go that close to the end of the cliff. We can pass a middle-income tax cut today, send it to the president's desk. Again, that says there's an assumption that the high-end tax cuts will expire. That gives us almost $1 trillion And $1 trillion is what the cost is. $1.1 trillion is what the cost is of the sequester. So I would have hoped that either the two candidates for the president and the candidate for president, Mitt Romney, the leadership in the Congress, the private sector would weigh in and say, you've got to have revenue on the table to make this work. You've got to have growth in order to bring in revenue, and you've got to make some tough decisions about spending. We already have. We've already cut over $1 trillion. So that part of it, we've already gone down that path. So we can't go down that path again without having some commensurate revenue to come in.
Well, just to follow very quickly, just because you weren't familiar with it, Senator Graham is saying, well, he's one Republican saying, we should have revenue, not in the form of any higher taxes as you would favor, I assume, but tax expenditures. He mentions like the corporate jet loophole, close that, all these other things.
Now, those things should be closed. But again, I'm not going to respond to a smidgen of what one senator is saying. The fact is that the Republicans in the House of Representatives have stood in the way of a middle-income tax cut which frees $1 trillion to avoid the sequester. I appreciate the intentions of anybody who's thoughtfully paying attention to this, but the fact is that it's not just about closing loopholes so that you have to do it in a comprehensive way. It's not just about closing loopholes, although I think we have to do that. But we also have to make sure we have the revenue so that we can fulfill our role on the public-private partnership that is job-creating in our country. The education of our people, the safety of our communities, judicial system, a transportation system to get product and people to and from home and to market, and the rest of that. So we have to, again, look at this about, let's take the complete, excuse me, high road on this. This not, and having nothing to do with politics, and that's really, I think, how most people come to Congress, is to say, how can we work together to find solutions? We all agree that it's important to the success of our country, our innovation, our competitiveness, and most importantly, the self-fulfillment of our people, that we educate the American people, that we educate our children, that we have an immoral obligation to create jobs, to have public policies that enable the private sector and sometimes public-private partnerships to create jobs, that we want retirement security for our seniors, health and retirement security for our seniors, that we want to defend our country and do all of this in a fiscally sound way. If you don't believe that there is a government role in any of the above, then you're not going to accept any reason to pay for it. So again, it's a budget issue, not just a revenue issue, but without the revenue, the starvation of our responsibilities to the American people will make us less competitive. We don't accept that verdict. We intend to be number one, to stay number one, and to make that fight. And that's why we want tax policies that do not reward companies that send jobs overseas, but tax policies that support the strengthening of the industrial, technological, and manufacturing base in our own country. Make it in America, Mr. Hoyer would say if he were here, and we all echo him, that we want a tax policy that has fairness, that puts money in the pockets of the middle class so it injects demand into the economy when that money is spent, that it is job creating. So this is a bigger issue than one proposal or another here or there. And it's something that should be done in a nonpartisan way, bipartisan way, and in a way that, again, creates jobs and growth, reduces the deficit, and has fairness in our tax code.
Peter Pelosi.
Yes, sir.
Are you supporting or opposing the one-year extension of the livestock disaster program? I'm going to urge your members to do the same.
Well, I think this legislation that will be on the floor today is indicative of the failure of this do-nothing Republican Congress. We should have a farm bill. There's no secret that we were on a path to get a farm bill. It's not like it's come as a surprise to somebody. I didn't know we needed that. farm country in our country needs a farm bill. Our economy needs us to have a farm bill. And we would like to see a farm bill come to the floor that then can go to conference and that can resolve this. This is a responsibility we know we have. So this is an indication of the bankruptcy of the Republicans to get the job done. The Senate has gotten the job done in a bipartisan way. We should be able to pass a bill in the House that goes to conference to do that. So again, I see this as indicative of failure. Some of what is in it in terms of the pay-fors coming out of conservation, issues that relate to states like California, for example, specialty crops are ignored in all of this, and so I have doubts about this legislation. Members will do what is in their interest of their communities to do, but make no mistake. We should be voting on a farm bill, not a drought bill. I have great sympathy for the needs of our cattlemen and those who are suffering from the drought. Many of those people are in California as well, from my own golden state of California. But I think that this bill is just another indication of we're doing something that doesn't meet the needs of the issue that our economy requires, and we should be passing a farm bill.
Madam Leader.
Leader Pelosi, local politicians in San Francisco, Boston, Chicago have made remarks that the food chain Chick-fil-A is not welcome in their cities as a result of the company's CEO's support of traditional marriage. A Chicago alderman has taken action on zoning rights to keep the food chain out of his ward. And Mayor Ed Lee of San Francisco tweeted, quote, "The closest Chick-fil-A in San Francisco is 40 miles away, and I strongly recommend that they not try to come any closer." Can you weigh in on this debate?
No, I didn't. I said what I tweeted was I'm a Kentucky Fried Chicken fan. That's where my loyalty lies. But I'm here to talk about the tax policy of the United States of America, avoiding a budget cliff and the rest of that. I'll leave the local matters to my locality.
Do you really think, though, that perhaps like any business should be banned from a city?
36. The nays are 182. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. All those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Speaker,
gentleman from Colorado.
On that, I request a roll call vote.
Roll call vote is a recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. Sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
So this is the second of 2 votes in this series. This is a 5-minute vote on the rule for debating the drought aid measure. Assuming it's agreed to, there'll be an hour of general debate coming up. We are also expecting members to debate on tax legislation today. 3 hours of deliberation set aside for that, with votes to follow. The Senate is in session today. Lawmakers wrapping up their last day before the summer recess, debating cybersecurity legislation. Senators just voted 52 to 46 to stop debate on the bill. 60 were needed to move forward. As this vote is underway, we'll get remarks now from a reporter keeping tabs on the drought aid measure that is underway and being debated in Congress. Ben Terrace writes for a national journal, why are House Republican leaders pursuing the standalone drought aid bill rather than a bill tied to a short-term extension of farm programs?
Well, this is actually kind of their third option. Originally, the goal was to have a farm bill that would be 5 years. The 2008 Farm Bill expires at the end of this year. Then they couldn't have the votes for that. There's too much division within the Republican Party, and also Democrats weren't psyched about the cuts to food stamps. So the next plan was to have a 1-year extension of the 2008 Farm Bill, have drought aid attached to that, but even that couldn't get the votes. So now this is, like I said, their third option. It's their go small and then go home option, just to have drought aid, because the drought is such a big deal right now that they can't do nothing. So they have to do at least something, and this is their attempt to do that.
Well, how much will this drought aid bill cost, and how will it be funded?
It's about $383 million for the drought aid, but it's going to be offset with cuts to conservation programs. And so I think the net savings of about $250 million after the cuts to conservation.
And who qualifies for it, and how would it be used?
The biggest concern right now is livestock. Crop insurance covers a lot of agriculture around the country, but livestock doesn't have anything quite like crop insurance. And with prices of their feed going up and with their animals dying in the heat, they need to get some money, and mostly livestock, but also some tree farmers, some fruit farmers will qualify as well.
Originally, this was to be a suspension bill, which needs a two-thirds threshold, but that plan was changed to require a simple majority. Why is that? What was the problem with reaching the higher threshold?
Sure. Well, originally they thought they were going to get Democratic support just so they could go home. But it looked like Democrats weren't really going to come on board. The cuts to conservation, they weren't too psyched about. They also didn't really like the idea of supporting the Republicans when they have their own plans of what the bill should look like. So without any Democratic support, or with few Democrats coming on board, it was going to be tough to get the votes. They also were going to lose some of their own conservatives as well.
What's the outlook for the Farm Bill now that drought aid is moving separately?
That's a good question. It's hard to know, really. Once this package passes, which it probably will, they'll go home. They'll have all of August, and Democrats like Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow thinks that that will be a good time to continue negotiations and come back in September. And you know, the Farm Bill expires on September 30th. I mean, there will be some leeway after that, but they really want to get something done before then.
What's likely to happen to this House drought aid legislation in the Senate?
Well, it's not likely to go anywhere in the Senate anytime soon. They don't really like it. Harry Reid said that if they had a drought package that looked exactly like the package that they had in their own Senate bill, they could support it, but this is different enough. So probably it'll pass here, and then they'll keep conversations going into the summer.
Ben Terrace is with National Journal. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And a vote on approving the rule for debating drought aid legislation underway in the House right now. Assuming it's agreed to, there'll be an hour of general debate later, along with a vote on final passage. We are also expecting debate on tax legislation this afternoon. 3 hours of deliberations set aside for that, with votes to follow.
81, the resolution is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Got it. House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to take from the Speaker's table the bill S-739 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 739, an act to authorize the architect of the Capitol to establish battery recharging stations for privately owned vehicles and parking areas under the jurisdiction of the Senate at no net cost to the federal government.
Is there objection to consideration of the bill? Without objection, the bill is read a third time, passed. The motion reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to take from the Speaker's table the bill H.R. 1402 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 449, H.R. 1402, a bill to authorize the architect of the Capitol to establish battery recharging stations for privately owned vehicles in parking areas under the jurisdiction of the House of Representatives at no net cost to the federal government.
Is there objection to the consideration of the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will report committee amendment.
Mr. Speaker,
California seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment to the bill at the desk.
The clerk will report the committee amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Daniel Lundgren of California. Amend Section 1E to read as follows. E. Reports. 1. In general, not later than 30 days after the end of each fiscal year, the architect of the Capitol shall submit a report on the financial administration and cost recovery of activities under this section with respect to that fiscal year to the Committee on House Administration of the House of Representatives. 2. Avoiding subsidy. A. Determination. Not later than 3 years after the date of enactment of this Act, and every 3 years thereafter, the architect of the Capitol shall submit a report to the Committee on House Administration of the House of Representatives determining whether members, including any delegate or resident commissioner to Congress, and covered employees using battery charging stations as authorized by this Act are receiving a subsidy from the taxpayers. B. Modification of rates and fees. If a determination is made under
Gentleman from California.
Be dispensed with. The reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Seeing none, the reading is dispensed with. Without objection, the reading is dispensed with. The amendment is agreed to. The bill is engrossed, read a third time, passed, and the motion reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask that for consideration of H.R. 6333.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6233, a bill to make supplemental agricultural disaster assistance available for fiscal year 2012, with the costs of such assistance offset by changes to certain conservation programs and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 752, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, and the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Peterson, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I might consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 6233, which provides disaster aid to livestock and other producers. I'm sure all of my colleagues are keenly aware of what's happening across this great country. A drought of epic proportions is gripping a large majority of the nation, and with it, it is endangering vast areas of agriculturally productive land. The map behind me illustrates just how widespread and how bad this drought really is. Just yesterday in my home state of Oklahoma, we had temperatures topping out at 115 degrees. Vast areas of productive pasture land are burned up, and our ranchers are in dire need. But also, let's be very clear why we are here on the floor today. In 2008, Congress passed a farm bill that did not provide a final year of disaster assistance. I have heard people call this extending disaster assistance by a year. No. What we're doing is fixing a problem. We are backfilling a hole or fixing a deficiency. And I'm not here to point fingers. I was elected to fix problems. We have a drought. We don't have a disaster program, and I'm here to provide a solution. Now, in past years, we might just wave our hand and declare this emergency spending. But we tend not to do that anymore, thank goodness. So this bill pays for itself, and not only does it pay for itself, it gives more than $250 million to deficit reduction. To me, that sounds like fixing a problem. Amazingly, that's not the end of the story. Some people do not like how we paid for the bill. Now, quite frankly, I don't either. I was the subcommittee chairman for conservation programs in 2002 when we gave an extra $17 billion to conservation programs. I'm a proponent of voluntary incentive-based conservation programs. But let me give you a little history on EQIP funding. 10 years ago, in fiscal year 2002, we authorized $200 million in EQIP fund spending. In fiscal year 2009, we authorized $1,340 million. And for fiscal year 2013, we authorized $1,750 million. Yes, we're cutting real dollars. $350 million will not go to our farmers and ranchers to help comply with the enormous regulations facing them. But at the end of the day, this will still be the largest amount of money ever spent on the EQIP program. 7 times what we spent in 2002. The other offset is the CSP program, which was vastly, I might note for the record, improved in 2008. For those of you here in 2008 who voted for the Farm Bill, the CSP program in the House bill had $0. Yes, $0 when it left the House. In the just passed Ag Committee Farm Bill, we limit CSP to 9 million acres. I greatly respect the conservation community, but to hear them say we are destroying conservation programs could not be farther from the truth. You'll also hear people complain that this isn't the full Farm Bill. My priority remains to get a 5-year Farm Bill on the books and to put those policies into place. But the most pressing business before us today is to provide disaster assistance to those producers impacted by drought conditions who are currently exposed. It is as simple as that. There is a problem out there. Let's fix it. Now let me address the Farm Bill that my colleagues seem to either love or hate, or love to hate, or hate to love. The bill is not perfect. No legislation is. Now we can spend our time trying to chip at the federal deficit $1 million at a time, coming down to the floor on every appropriations bill. Or we can spend our time writing opinion pieces for the Wall Street Journal. Or we can do something about it. The Farm Bill that passed out of my committee, the Agriculture Committee, saves $35 billion. Now let me repeat that. $35 billion. Tell me another piece of legislation that has bipartisan support and a chance to pass the United States Senate that saves that much money. Now, my friends on my side of the aisle will say we don't cut enough, while my friends on the other side of the aisle will say we cut too much. This is the perfect case of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. I believe in the legislative process. I believe in letting the House work its will. We did it in the House Agriculture Committee, and we can do it here too. Mr. Speaker, let me say again, I am committed to giving certainty to our farmers. I plan to work towards the goal that we get back in September. But we are here today to fix a problem. Let's do it without partisan bickering. There's a disaster happening out there. Let's give the tools to our ranchers who are the most exposed. The bill is paid for. Let's do what the American people sent us here to do. That's fix problems. I urge my colleagues, join me in voting for H.R. 6233. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Today is the last session before the August recess, and once again, the House will adjourn without finishing its work. You know, and it's no wonder that nobody likes Congress anymore. Members will now have to explain to their constituents why the House did not even try to consider a new 5-year farm bill. Frankly, we're in this position because the House leadership has refused to bring the 5-year farm bill to the floor. Working in a bipartisan tradition on the Agriculture Committee, Chairman Lucas and I have crafted a new 5-year farm bill, making many important and needed reforms, and I appreciate the efforts of the chairman in trying to enact a long-term policy, and I know that if he had his way, as he just said, we would have already passed a farm bill. The chairman and I were ready to mark up our bill at the end of June, but the Republican leadership stepped in and said that they wanted us to consider the Ag-Appropriations bill. So we held off and for a couple of weeks, and then they didn't even bring the Ag-Appropriations bill to the floor. The committee completed their work then on July 11th, passing a new bill, 5-year bill, 35-11, on a bipartisan vote. But rather than bring this bill to the floor, the House instead focused on messaging bills that are going nowhere. Now, I understand that this is an election year, and the majority wants to promote their message, and I've even voted for some of these bills. But you would think that after delaying us for 2 weeks, the leadership would have found 2 days on the House calendar to consider the committee's farm bill before the August recess. Instead of bringing up the 5-year farm bill, the Republican leadership last week put forth a 1-year farm bill extension, hoping to delay action until the next Congress, with hopes that for some people that they're going to dismantle the farm and food safety nets. Fortunately, under intense opposition from those in agriculture and others, the leadership had to pull the bill. So this brings us to today's consideration of H.R. 6233. This measure will provide some assistance to a few livestock producers affected by drought conditions across the country. Providing assistance to livestock producers, primarily cattle and sheep, is necessary and important. But this is not a comprehensive disaster package. Dairy and specialty crop producers are going to be left hurting, and there's no assistance for pork and poultry producers. The Ag Committee's Farm Bill not only includes the livestock provisions we're considering today, it also strengthens the farm safety net with a wide-ranging list of commodities. A 5-year farm bill will do a better job of providing certainty for American agriculture and assistance during this period of drought. Additionally, I have concerns about the conservation cuts that are used to pay for this assistance. I don't think cutting conservation programs to offset the cost of disaster is the right approach. If there was more time, maybe we could find a better way to do this. But in the rush of putting this bill together, it didn't give us the necessary time to explore all of the options. This is yet another reason that I think bringing up a 5-year bill makes more sense. It's just mystifying to me why House leaders can't take yes for an answer. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard from the other side complaints about the Senate not being able to get our bills passed. You know, we've passed a lot of bills, most of which I supported, that are over in the Senate. They never took them up. But now the Senate has passed a bill, and this may be the only time that we'll ever be able to get a farm bill through the Senate. you know, and they passed it on a bipartisan basis. We passed it on a bipartisan basis, and now the leadership doesn't want to bring it up. I don't understand it. The farm economy is the one part of the economy that's actually working, doing well, has been solid for the last few years. This is due in part, I believe, to the strong farm bill that we passed in '08. And weathering a natural disaster without the certainty of a 5-year bill could jeopardize one of the bright spots we have in this economy. So with all that said, I do recognize the effects the drought is having on our farmers, and I will vote in favor of H.R. 6233. However, this bill is a sad substitute for what is really needed, a long-term farm policy. So I'll continue to urge my colleagues to bring up the House Agriculture 5-year Farm Bill and to ensure that all producers will have necessary assistance during these times of disaster. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield to the gentlelady from South Dakota, Ms. Noem, 2 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. And Mr. Speaker, today I rise in support of H.R. 6233, the Supplemental Agriculture Disaster Assistance Bill. As we look across the United States, many areas, including South Dakota, are facing a serious drought. While many of our producers are covered by crop insurance, our livestock producers don't have the same safety net in place to weather this drought. That's why the livestock disaster programs are so important. The last Farm Bill was in place for 5 years, while the livestock disaster programs were only put into place for 4. That's why back in April I introduced legislation that would reauthorize those programs and retroactively look at 2012, recognizing that it was a dereliction of our duty to make sure that there was a safety net for our livestock producers as well. The 2008 Farm Bill did not extend that disaster coverage for this year, but today we have the chance to make that right. This House should not go home while literally hanging our ranchers out to dry without a safety net to get through this drought. This need is immediate, which is why we need to get this done. Beyond this, I'm going to continue to advocate for a 5-year Farm Bill, knowing it's the right thing to do, making sure that these programs are put into place for the lifetime of that Farm Bill so that we can avoid situations like this. The full 5-year Farm Bill is the best way to get a long-term safety net for our livestock producers and for our commodity producers as well. But we can't wait another day with this drought going on without giving our ranchers some needed certainty. So that's why I'm going to urge all of my colleagues to vote yes today and continue to work to get a 5-year Farm Bill. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield back.
Gentleman from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now am pleased to yield 4 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Iowa, one of our ranking members, Mr. Boswell.
Gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on behalf of farmers and producers in Iowa and in my district and across the country. And I want to thank you, Chairman Lucas, and you, Ranking Member Peterson, for your working together to try to resolve a need for the Farm Bill. As you know, we're suffering because of the drought that continues to beat down on our land and our livestock. While I am not 100% pleased with this bill, I will vote today to move it forward. On behalf of my producers in need and for those who have been grappling for hay and have begun to liquidate cattle, I will support this disaster aid bill. However, I do with a heavy heart, yet with the eternal optimism of a farmer, as you are, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Peterson. As a cow-calf producer myself, I can tell you exactly what our farmers and ranchers across America want. They want a farm bill, a 5-year farm bill, that will provide long-term certainty in a changing market with an uncontrollable climate. Producers in my state want a farm bill to invest in expansions and research for insurance programs, like the provisions we worked on in the House Committee for Livestock Insurance and for specialty crops. They want to see a bill that will help them beyond 2012 and 13, a bill that shows what we know. Not only must we react to this drought, but we must prepare for the future. Since July of 11, I have expressed my support for a farm bill every chance I have had. I hope for a conference, the same way I hope for rain. However, the Republican leadership has taken every chance they get to block debate on a 5-year farm bill. It is clear this is not a perfect bill, but this happens to be imperfect times, and I believe we must respond to the drought that is impacting more than half of our nation, as was depicted by the chairman a few moments ago. I have reservations regarding the cuts to conservation, particularly since conservation programs have been one option to help feed the cattle under our current drought. Furthermore, if we could bring the Farm Bill to the floor, we could respond to drought issue, we could debate issues that are critical to all Americans, and we could advance a bill that saves tens of billions of dollars. It is imperative that we pass a comprehensive long-term Farm Bill. Farmers and ranchers always face decisions that carry very serious financial ramifications, such as planting a crop, buying land, upgrading machinery, building a herd. And we know that if we don't have a Farm Bill, that there's going to be a lot of ramifications on those out there that depend on the agriculture economy for a lot more than producing cattle or corn and beans or wheat or whatever. The machinery is a big part of it. Both the Senate and the House Agriculture Committees have produced reform-minded, bipartisan bills that address many of the core principles that are important, such as strengthening crop insurance and ensuring strong agricultural research and development. We have heard time and again in this House how uncertainty in the marketplace hinders job creation and economic growth. Not passing a long-term Farm Bill is bringing uncertainty to family farmers across Iowa, across the nation, and this uncertainty must end. We must pass a 5-year Farm Bill as soon as possible. Therefore, I remain hopeful, my eternal optimism, as I stated, that after providing relief to our producers impacted by this drought, that when we return from the August work period, that Speaker Boehner will welcome us back with a Farm Bill on the floor. I yield back. I support this resolution.
I reserve the ballot. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Virginia, one of the most experienced and knowledgeable members of the Ag Committee, the gentleman, Mr. Goodlatte, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask the unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. And I want to thank Chairman Lucas for his leadership on this issue and Ranking Member Peterson for his support of this effort to take action to help livestock producers who are being devastated by the drought. Livestock farmers in the 6th District of Virginia have been hit hard by the heat and the derecho that swept through the Shenandoah Valley last month. This disaster relief was included in the 2008 Farm Bill, but unfortunately did not last the full length of the Farm Bill. I'm pleased that the Congress has found a way to provide relief for these livestock farmers. And not only do we provide the relief, but we pay for it. And not only do we pay for it, but we also achieve additional savings that are applied to the deficit. If every bill passed by the Congress reduced spending overall, we would be in much better fiscal condition in the federal government. While the Congress has taken an important first step in providing relief for drought-stricken livestock farmers, the administration has at hand a tool that they should use right now to provide drought relief as well. The Obama administration has at its disposal an easy relief valve that would provide drought relief, if only temporarily, a reduction in the government-mandated renewable fuel standard. I have long been a critic of the RFS that has increased food and feedstocks being diverted into fuel, leading to diminished supplies for livestock and food producers. In fact, last year, 40% of the U.S. corn crop was used for ethanol production. There's no doubt that this policy has driven up the price of corn, which today is hovering around $8 a bushel. This, in turn, drives up the cost of food. Unfortunately, because of the drought, we no longer have the luxury of being just worried about the price. This drought is so devastating, we have to be increasingly worried we do not have a large enough corn supply to meet all of our competing demands. As we confront the reality of the tightening corn supplies, there are real concerns about having enough to satisfy the RFS and the needs of our food producers. We should not be in a position where we are choosing between fuel and food. In fact, the government has chosen. They've chosen fuel over food with a policy that mandates a certain amount of corn production going to ethanol production each year. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. It is a first start toward addressing a longer-term problem that requires other action. And
gentleman from Minnesota.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to reluctantly oppose this measure, not because the drought relief is not desperately needed in many parts of this country, but because we have a far better vehicle to do this in the form of the Farm Bill that Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member Peterson have worked tirelessly on behalf to produce a good 5-year farm policy on behalf of American agriculture. We need to do the job that we were sent here to do. The drought relief package that we are voting on today, I believe, is sadly more about giving the Republican leadership relief when they go back to their districts in August than helping our nation's farmers, ranchers, and dairymen. There's no denying that the action is needed to offer relief, and we must do that. And hopefully we'll come to an agreement in September. But the best action, I believe, is passing the bipartisan farm bill. If we're serious about helping agriculture make it through this drought, we would have brought the bipartisan farm bill that came out of the United States Senate, that passed the House Agriculture Committee by a vote of 35 to 11, following the regular order. The fact is that instead of working on a conference committee as we should be doing at this time, because we certainly have had enough time to do that, we are voting on a patchwork measure that, in my opinion, is more about politics than policy, and more likely than not will go nowhere in the United States Senate. The dairymen, poultry producers, and cattle feeders in my district have seen their feed prices skyrocket 30 to 35% in the last 6 to 8 weeks. And yes, we ought to provide relief through the renewable fuel standards. Bankruptcies are increasing at an alarming rate among the dairy industry in California. When these businesses are already struggling to stay afloat, they look to Congress for leadership. They look to Congress for real action to produce a 5-year farm bill. Drought relief alone is not enough. Lord knows we dealt with a drought in California that was devastating in 2009 and 2010. Passing a farm bill would give farmers, ranchers, and dairymen the certainty that we need for the next 5 years in a part of the economy that has been doing, generally speaking, fairly well over the last several years. This includes long-term authority for disaster assistance, along with other support that the Farm Bill that helps them do their work in the conservation programs, in the EQIP programs, market access programs, in research that is vital to American agriculture. This bill, sadly, would pit disaster relief against conservation programs that farmers in my district rely on. We need real solutions, and the solution, in my opinion, is passing a farm bill, not half-hearted actions to protect our political interests. My colleagues, we have the time. Let's go to a conference committee and produce a bipartisan farm bill. It's traditionally the most bipartisan thing we do in this Congress.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Speaker, I wish to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas who's been dealing with drought issues for 2 years in a row now.